Yeah. Platform against nuclear hazards, Plage, as it is abbreviated, the plague. And I've been fighting nuclear power ever since the Austrian referendum campaign. It wasn't a referendum campaign before, at first, when Austria decided not to put into operation the Zwentendorf nuclear power plant, 35 kilometers west of Vienna on the Danube. A long campaign had built up, and at the end, Chancellor Kreisky had decided that referendum because he thought he would win it. Well, we did win it, and ever since that time, I've been engaged in this issue. Dear panelists, I would like Johan Swahn to come up to join the two already present. Welcome to this panel on the possible futures of the Euratom Treaty and an EU founding treaty, as was already said, whose weight impacts on European energy policy has been far too little appreciated, far too little known in every, even non-nuclear country. This has improved a bit in Austria because we have been informing about Euratom ever since our accession time in 1993-94. But still, in other places, in other countries, it's far too little known. The impact is tremendous. Just take Hinkley Point. I'll come back to you, to the panel, and kick it off on Hinkley Point briefly. In case I make serious mistakes as a moderator somewhere or forget something important, please tell us. Mistakes are just a normal thing, if they, on condition they don't happen all the time, of course. Time is very short, so we can give at maximum 5 minutes to the floor at the end, and we have half an hour in between. We have decided to have an initial statement of 3 to 5 minutes from Johan Swahn, from Sweden, that is, as he did in the presentation. And yeah, I have to tell you too that 5 minutes discussion, contributions from the floor, and we have to reserve 10 seconds for gifts that I have brought from Austria to some of you. Don't let me forget that. So, Johan, please go ahead for 3 to 5 minutes.
Yes, my name is Johan Swahn, and I work for Swedish Environmental NGO, working on nuclear waste issues, NKT, Miljø, nuclear waste review. And I've been quite heavily involved in the Swedish discussions on nuclear waste, and also I have been involved a bit also in the Danish discussions about nuclear waste. But today I'm here to discuss an issue which for me is quite important, but I'm not really the expert on this. Dörte and Antony have much more insight. But I would like to bring in the perspective of an environmental NGO. I have, for the last 3-4 years, become much engaged with the European environmental movement, the people working with nuclear energy, nuclear issues against nuclear power, and so on. And these people, very many, Heinz is one of them, they are all very engaged. And we have been able to form a small organization in Brussels called Nuclear Transparency Watch, together with parliamentarians, European parliamentarians, and other experts. And my experience now from these years, doing much more work in Brussels, is that the Euratom Treaty has severe limitations on the way that environmental NGOs can act in Europe. And the problem is basically that the European Commission has this specific part, which is the Euratom part. It is based in Brussels. It's a little isolated even from the rest of the EU. It's based in Luxembourg. Sorry, it's a bit isolated from the main
nuclear enterprise ever, probably. And in order to be able to build it, the huge subsidies from taxpayers and electricity consumers have been foreseen by the British government. In order for Électricité de France to build it at all. Now, Austria has filed a complaint with the European Court of Justice in 2015, which will be decided soon, on July 12th. That's what has been said recently. On July 2018, it will be decided by the European Court of Justice. Now, what do you think? What have you heard in the corridors of Brussels, maybe, Dörte, Fouquet, maybe Antony, about what will be the outcome, what will be the judgment, the verdict of the European Court on this case? Because this case could have tremendous, exemplary consequences for new build in all over Europe, in all throughout the EU, because Poland, France itself, Slovakia, etc., they strive for giving the same public money support to future nuclear projects, above all nuclear power plants. So, and that's the only way that new projects, nuclear projects, will be decided even by the pro-nuclear governments. So what will be the outcome?
As I said before, it's, you said the European Court will decide in July. The court never says anything and never lets anything drop. The only thing I could say, because I worked for the Austrian government on a legal evaluation, for which then was the position paper of Austria during the process before the Commission decided in favor of Hinkley Point, so I know the argumentation, and we worked together because I presented in parallel the case of electricity utilities and communal power suppliers who also went to the European Court against the Hinkley Point decision. They were from Germany and from Austria. We were not admitted because it was said that the decision on Hinkley Point to the UK government did not directly affect the interest of the utilities, which it's another debate. What I could foresee is that the Austrian government and Luxembourg, who is supporting the Austrian position, intervened. They made very strong points. One, they took a lot of impetus to say that de facto, if I may, the common European interest, if it ever has been vital, living under Euratom, at least nowadays is no longer there if you have people phasing out and so forth. So they try to neglect the Article 1 and 2 and the preambles of the Euratom Treaty. But that is only one argument. It's probably that argument which is closest to our heart and to a sense of justice. But then they also made a very, very good evaluation of that the UK government has violated procurement rules. They never called others to build a nuclear power plant or to build something else in that respect. And so that is a very hard fact, a hard law thing. And they also said that the Commission had a very tough time in arguing which article. So you have the articles 167 who forbid state aid, and then you have the exemption rules underlying. And for this thing, even though, as you know, it's a over 30-year support, like a feed-in tariff, it is increased, it's indexed, so whenever life gets more expensive, automatically they get more and so forth. So this is an operation aid, normally in the classical terms. For operation aid, the Commission would not have the right to give that money. So the Commission created, whereas for investment aid there is more leeway, so the Commission created a very strange hybrid investment aid, if I may say. So what I could foresee is that this European Court could say, we do not touch the question of the common interest. We already asked the Commission to go back to the drawing board and to make a better decision based on our critical remarks that the aid definition is not clearly used and maybe procurement rules, and there were other things. So I could well see that we do not get a clear vote that the court would say with the joint European interest, I accept the view of Austria. And I have a little bit problem that the court could do that. Because in that aspect, then the court would say that the Euratom basic articles can no longer be applied in a way. So it's a very tricky. In that respect, I think Madame Vestager could have stopped the whole thing, as I just said, more on the basic grounds. In that respect, I think her opening remark recently to a reform process hints to me that she would also more follow this line, that you cannot kill that beast without changing these articles.
Great Britain has based its claim for permission for subsidies for Hinkley Point C to a large degree on the Euratom Treaty, on Euratom Treaty provisions, and that's the most subsidized project. What the public here should remember in the future is, I think, that this gives a perfect illustration of the weight of the purport that the Euratom Treaty provisions have today. So it has in the radiation protection area, for example, and there are scandalous things happening under Euratom in that area too, but this would go too far. Thanks for... Antony, do you want to add something? No, thank you. Now let's get back to the more fundamental question of Euratom reform and its probability or improbability, and some link with Brexitom. Antony, if I understood you rightly, the Brexitom debate was going on in Britain, has been going on in Britain, as a matter of fact, without touching that fundamental question, or without giving any lesson, any conclusion toward a reform necessity for Euratom for the rest of the member countries, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So NGOs and some outstanding personalities in the renewables and anti-nuclear sector, like Heinz one of the fathers of the renewable energy law in Germany, right away, and that's my personal opinion too, that it should be like that, but legally, juridically, it's probably not like that. The Brexitom opens up the Euratom issue to the whole of the EU politics and public. But the process as it is directed, guided, carried through by the European Commission and Great Britain just leaves aside the question of reform. So the optimism or the expectation of European NGOs that Brexitom would lead to put Euratom reform on the table is probably very much exaggerated. The rudder comes from, there's a question there which we will hold back until the end, if it's right. The question, the more important factor is probably that the Commission itself, Juncker, has announced that reform will be come on the table according to demand formulated in that protocol in 2005 by Germany, Austria, Denmark, Ireland, etc. So will the German, and then there is the Germany has been consequential in that respect now, the German coalition agreement gives a promise that the government will put Euratom reform on the table. And if Germany does do it, that would might really trigger that process. Again, Dörte, what's the probability? You talked about it, but
I can just briefly say.
And what does it need from NGOs?
Yeah, exactly. I would maybe concentrate on that. I think that it would be really helpful if the NGOs would push for their, because you said member states, or Johan said member states can ask for reform, but it can also come out of the middle of the European Parliament. It can come from national parliaments. So if you would push if you would, first of all, when I'm lecturing on nuclear law in Germany, in the university in the north, in Leuphana, and whenever the young people start listening to me in this master program on sustainability, they come in and they say to me, oh, we thought for us in Germany, the thing is over, we phase out and it's more a technicality. We did not even know Euratom has such an importance. But so if you would go and look back and say, acknowledge Euratom is still important, so we go after our members of parliament, we go after our Minister of Energy and ask him to go to Brussels or to speak first, as I said before. This push must come. In Germany now we push. There is now a question submitted by members of the German Bundestag to the government, which includes also some pressure. The federal states will press the government to go ahead. But it would be really good if those pressure comes even in Austria, that we say, come on, it's a window of opportunity.
Thank you. So we put our hope on Germany to a large extent. If it is to come to, if Euratom reform is to be tackled. Apart from this, the Commission and Juncker have announced, as I said, that some reform of Euratom should be undertaken. And from June 2018 on, if this aims at real revision, what do you think? What do you think? Which will be the direction of revision? It could hardly, the Euratom Treaty could hardly become more pro-nuclear. Hardly give more privileges to the nuclear industry. That's true. But will it necessarily? Will reform necessarily take away privileges? Or is there a chance that the Euratom Treaty could be fixed more firmly in the EU institutional body? Do you have any idea about that?
I just think that we need an update on what is going on in Brussels on this issue. Maybe Antony could do that, or you can do that, and maybe have a comment on that.
Yeah, I think we're a little bit optimistic when you call Juncker, because I was when I talked about this case concerning the German Länder Rheinland-Pfalz against and Nordrhein-Westfalen against the Belgian nuclear power prolongation. We had a meeting. We have introduced a complaint to the Commission, which she didn't follow up. We are at the Conseil d'État in Brussels, and we are at the UNECE on the ESPO Convention on access to transport environmental impact assessment. And there, my young colleague met a colleague, head of unit from the Commission, and he from the Luxembourg crowd, yeah, and he said, "Yeah, we heard that Juncker wants that, but we do not know what he wants. So it's not even sure that it will come." So I would keep it on hold. It's about the new half-term working program, which the Commission should introduce now, but I haven't seen it yet. Maybe Vestager's comment was pushing also, can be seen as pushing in that direction.
Can a presiding country like Austria, and our presidency will start very soon, come back on that and demand that this announcement be filled with life?
Yeah, they could. I mean, the role of the president of the council is always a difficult role, because he has to be the mediator, so he cannot always be the one who pushes agendas ahead. He has to. But what he could do, if Juncker gets some wording in this work program, he, for example, could convene an informal council meeting on preparatory on those questions and just have an informal exchange in Vienna with his colleagues. So he's not unable to do. On the other hand, the next half year, we have the winter package. I don't know if you know that. This is more than 3,500 pages of new energy law legislation discussed in Brussels. At the moment, we will finish 3 of the main directives, but there's a long way to go. So there's a lot of work for Austria, but at least Austria to just conclude the legislatory package, because everything has to be finished by January next year, if not February, because then we have European elections, and when the European election comes and a directive is not finalized with Parliament and Council, then it has to start afresh. So there are a little bit other priorities at the moment, which are also burning, like on energy market design, on the new Renewable directive. But I would love it if Austria would at least convene some informal council.
Thank you. Yes, Johan?
Well, yes. My understanding from discussing with the Euratom people in Luxembourg is that there has been some interest in making a statement on the Euratom treaty from the Commission, and the comments that have been made by the Euratom people in Luxembourg have been passed upwards, and they don't know what will happen to them.
Do you have any insight into that, or no?
Do you think that NGOs in Sweden, and believe me, it's a very long process, I know, because we've done that since our accession, or before the accession to the EU and Euratom, but the question has to be asked, do you think that in Sweden, of course, and Niels Henrik Hauge would be very glad if something, what he has been trying to bring about for years now in Denmark, and which is maybe starting a little bit in an improved way now here through this conference. Do you think that your organization and other important Swedish environmental organizations could take up at least a minimum of Euratom information for their members, etc., and participate a little bit more, put it on the table in the public energy discussion?
Well, first of all, I would like to, Sweden was one of the countries in this 2007 declaration.
Yes, yeah.
And I'm certain that the civil servants in Sweden who work with nuclear issues, they know this issue completely well and could be very prepared to work from Sweden's perspective with the politicians if they have the opportunity. The problem in Sweden regarding nuclear is there's been a very big difference in political parties about nuclear in Sweden. And this debate has been going on for many, many years. Now, there has been a couple of agreements the last years, and now, well, Johan, you mentioned the latest agreement, which says it will be 100% renewable electricity by 2040, exactly, yes. So there is a unity there, but it's quite weak, and the politicians are a bit hesitant in raising nuclear issues like this one. But the Swedish environmental movement has very good contacts, both with the bureaucrats, the civil servants, but also in politics, especially in the present government, which is a Green Social Democrat one. But their issue has not been discussed as far as I know. And it's not on the priority of the politics, as I said, and therefore it's not. But we have elections in September, and anything can happen, basically. We don't know at all. It's very, very difficult political situation in Sweden after the elections, if you look at the polls. The same problem as we have in many other countries. But one thing that could happen is that there will be a little more of a breakup of the alliances, so to say, and therefore there could be perhaps more relaxation of the conflict of nuclear. So that it might open up a possibility in the next year for the politics also to become more interested in this issue. So, but it's extremely difficult to know, and you must understand that it's the politics that's a problem, not the progress.
But I think it would help. That's my personal opinion as an NGO representative from another country. We would be so grateful if you just started the thing from the bottom and try to inform your members, just give them an idea of Euratom and the Euratom Treaty. That would be a first step, wouldn't it?
Yes, I agree. The largest Swedish environmental organization is called the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, and they of course have a nice magazine, for example. This would be a very good article, and I could give them a good tip.
Thank you. Now we're approaching the end. Yes, it's the floor's turn. 3 people, 4 want to ask questions, but I have to give one other information, which is even less known than many of those that have been given. Little probability rather, that Euratom reform will really be tackled unless Germany puts the pressure, for example. And is that a problem? And at the same time, the European University Faculty of Law of the European University of Ljubljana in Slovenia has, I guess, been commissioned in a way by the European Commission to draft a new European EU constitution again. And in this constitutional draft for the European Union, the Euratom Treaty is built into the constitution. Would be built in exactly what they tried to do under the presidency of Giscard d'Estaing back in 2002, 2003, 2004. The important thing is that the privileges and the place for nuclear power, the weight for nuclear power via Euratom is again would be in that sole and single treaty, and that's very different, after all, from a long-standing treaty, which Euratom now is, which allows it to some degree to tackle it and maybe to get out, because the unilateral exit from Euratom is, I'm of a very different opinion on that, as compared with Antony, Froggatt, and, well, but that's too complex a question for here. Sorry, you were first.
Yes, my name is Thomas Swahn. I'm a chairman of the non-profit pro-nuclear organization, Miljø. I want to ask, I'm a bit confused. Are you calling for a phase-out of the Euratom, or just a reform of the Euratom treaty? Because yes, my name is Thomas. Yeah. Yes. I repeat, I'm a chairman of a pro-nuclear non-profit organization called Energifonden. And I'm a bit confused whether you want to phase out totally the Euratom treaty or you want to just reform it.
There are different options.
In other words, do you see no future for nuclear power, or do you see a future for research in nuclear power, to better reactors, to better nuclear power?
Shall I answer that? Well, if you ask me, there's no place for nuclear power in the future. Even nuclear fusion, as has shortly been said on ITER, every now and then, every 10 years, the time frontiers again pushed back by 50 years. And money, millions, billions of money is running into the ITER project. While the renewables are there and energy efficiency, much simpler things are there, and they bring in money while they still do cost some money. But this is a totally different and positive curve in favor of the renewables and of energy efficiency and to the
yeah, I mean, I think in some ways you were asking three different questions. One is, and I would separate them. I mean, I think that there's one is, what do you think about the future of nuclear power? And that's, in some ways, Heinz has given his view on that. I think the second question is on Euratom, in terms of, do you phase it out or do you reform it? And I think most people objectively would say, why does nuclear have its own treaty?
Yeah.
What is the justification for that? It's very clear if you were to start now, it wouldn't be the case. So the only reason is historic legacy. And at the time, the 1950s, it really was about rebuilding Europe, and there was decision about what were the core industries, nuclear, iron, coal, etc. And you can see why that occurred. It was the age of electricity too cheap to meter. So that's what happened. It hasn't changed. I think historically, because in terms of its setup, it didn't have a sunset clause. But also in terms of the negotiations, when you have the huge issues about the future direction of the EU, nuclear is just pushed to one side. The foreign ministers that are negotiating this, they don't know about nuclear, they don't really care about nuclear, they just want to make it as concrete as possible. So that's why it hasn't happened. I personally would argue that, and it's interesting with Brexit, where you start to see what the relevant bits are, and you can say, well, actually, we do need to have safeguards. Does it have to be Euratom? Well, no. You can have an EU one. I mean, you can have an individual domestic sort of member state one, but there are some advantages, there are some disadvantages of it. But we haven't actually analysed what the pros and the cons are, at least from a UK perspective. We just know we can't have it. So I think there are some areas, and also I would argue from a UK perspective, not being members of the EU, we lose an additional safety net on nuclear safety standards. So we will have domestic laws, but we won't have regional laws that ensure that domestic laws are kept in place. So I can see that there are some opportunities for the EU to continue to have competence in this area. But should we have a separate treaty? Should we have it that has non-voting of the European Parliament? Why? What's the rationale? And it's only historic. So I would say, in some ways, as we know, there are some powers that the EU probably should retain, but definitely doesn't need to have a Euratom treaty to do that. And it's actually detrimental for everyone if the Euratom treaty remains because of the lack of democracy within it.
I guess that would be a good word for the end, but we have Niels Henry to ask his question or make a short contribution.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Heinz. You were kind enough to mention my name, but I can assure you that I'm not the only one involved in the anti-nuclear campaign here in Denmark. There are a lot of people and a lot of NGOs who take an interest. However, Denmark is a non-nuclear country. We never goes for a lot of countries in the EU. Thus, Euratom is unfortunately a very marginalized topic. However, if you look at the green transition, energy transition in Europe in general, there's a lot of interest. So that's why I would like to ask the panel, if you look at Euratom phase out or reform, and if you look at, for instance, a treaty on renewables in Europe, do you see that as two separated issues, or do you see them combined?
It's a little bit difficult to answer. I see 10 years ago, I would have put it together in the debate, but now I wouldn't, because I think Renewable has already won the race. Why should we single us out when we are already close to mainstream, at least in some of the energy conversion technologies? I think we have to reflect on that. I know colleagues like you mentioned, Hans-Josef Fell would see it still as a good point, but my main thing is to be rational and to say the nuclear industry and the nuclear interested countries always claim on some values of nuclear and say it's economic, it's toll, it's CO2 and whatever, have you not? So then they should stand up and be honest about it. And for that, giving them that honesty, we need to take out of Euratom any promotion. That's, if we get that out of the Euratom Treaty, that's already done. And I could then foresee, unless we use the treaty, for example, if we would say the treaty is no longer a Euratom Treaty, the treaty is a European dismantling, safeguard and liability treaty, we could give it another name in this process. We should start with that. Then it may have still a chance for some times until the old reactors will be dismantled and we find a solution where we don't terrorize future generations. But at least, as I said, this promotional act then has to go out. And then I can foresee it will be like a domino. Then, because we have seen there is so little which is really important to keep an eye on, but very important things, I don't belittle it, that will be taken care of maybe then in the Union Treaty. And the Union Treaty may then, as has been done under 2002, under Penelope, may have those chapters. But the Renewable Treaty, why should I now be a zoo? I'm the mainstream, I could say, if I would be a renewable industry.
Thank you, Dörte. We are nibbling away on the break, and it's partly my fault, but it's the fault of the topic, isn't it? Who you still want to ask a question?
Yes, I'm Thomas, and I'm representing the Danish Nuclear Institute. I'm also representing Denmark at the International Atomic Energy Agency, and I am an advisor for Euratom, so I might disagree with some of you. Nevertheless, I think this is a very interesting topic, and I actually think that what we're fighting here is global warming and climate changes, and we need to apply a lot of CO2 neutral solutions. Nuclear is one of them, in my opinion. You might disagree. But I actually see an agreement with you guys in Euratom being an obstacle to these green goals. So I would just ask if there's anything anywhere where I can help you open up for a reform of the Euratom country.
There have been pro-nuclear actors in the past who thought that the privileges the nuclear industry should be able to do without the privileges of this treaty. So, in principle, I think many here will be...
Can I just say, I don't see it as a privilege. It's actually an obstacle.
Okay. That's one discussion. And there was a fourth one.
I say my question.
Oh, I think fine. Yeah, thank you so much. When you go, before you go out, you might be interested in taking these two sheets, a survey on the deficits, drawbacks of the Euratom Treaty, and what should be put in place, like the lack of democratic elements, and manifesto for the termination of Germany's Euratom membership. I don't give any details now. I'll put it there on the exit stairway.